Israel has lost in Gaza. Israel has lost in the eyes of the world. It has shown itself to be an illegitimate, brutal, and barbaric regime. It is genocidal. It has been exposed to the world. It has been unsuccessful in capturing a dot on the map called the Gaza Strip. After 9 months, it shows that it's a weak and vulnerable regime. It shows that its it has shown that its military intelligence is deeply flawed, and its ability to fight is not nearly as good as what it always claimed to be.
Welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. As you're aware, Masoud Pezeshkian has become president after a runoff vote. And I have with me, standing by in Tehran, Seyed Marandi. He's a professor at Tehran University. Welcome, sir. Glad to have you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Professor Marandi, Pezeshkian is referred to as a reformist leader. Are these labels of Western origin? How do you in Iran see him?
Well, these are labels that are used in the West, but they're also used in Iran. But in Iran, it really means something quite different, because people in Iran understand that these are not political parties. And reformist means different things to different people. And Mr. Pezeshkian actually has also referred to himself as a principalist. So I would say that he considers himself to be a centrist in Iranian politics, but also within a Western context, someone who is left-leaning, or at least, let's say, a social justice advocate as well.
So from what I've read, Pezeshkian was not allowed to contest some years ago. And this time he's been allowed and he's won. Does this suggest that perhaps his victory was preordained?
No, I don't see it that way at all. It was a competitive election, just like previous presidential elections. We had many debates on television. The original 6 candidates, they had 20 hours of debates. They were very hard-hitting. And in the second round, the top 2 candidates had 2 extensive debates where they were quite harsh.
Yeah.
Their differences, I think, were clear to everyone, and people voted and chose the person who they supported. I think in the West, they like to consider themselves to be democratic, whereas when we look at, for example, the US elections, you have the Democratic Party, which has super delegates, and the Republican Party also has mechanisms to make sure certain people go up. And there are no third parties. So, and then Europe, basically, whoever the Americans choose as their president within this framework, he rules over Europe as well, regardless of who's in power in which country. So I think that it's very clear that there are strong trends of democracy in the Iranian political system, and President-elect Pezeshkian's rise to power is a result of that.
So the rise of Pezeshkian, does that, what is the signal, what is the message being given out by the electorate?
Well, I think it's quite clear that since 90% of the electorate, according to polls, saw the economy as their top priority, he was elected because they believed that he was best equipped to deal with the country's economy. Remember, we had under President Rouhani 8 years of stagnation. The economy didn't grow. Under President Raisi, the country began to grow. The economy grew pretty well in his second year, and in his third year, the economy grew rather fast. his first year was basically paying, he was busy paying the debts of the previous administration. But the effects of the growth of the economy haven't yet been felt by most Iranians. So there's a strong sense among Iranians that someone needs to become president who will be able to make life easier for ordinary citizens. And I think it's quite clear that Dr. Pezeshkian was the person they thought best. Of course, he didn't win by a landslide, but it was a convincing victory. His key opponent was also left-leaning or a social justice advocate. So the competition was basically between two people who saw themselves as the best equipped to deal with social justice issues.
Is the message also from the public that they would like Iran's international isolation to end, to deal again with the West?
I don't think Iranians believe that they are internationally isolated anymore. In fact, I think President Raisi's legacy will be that he was able to break Iran's isolation. He began expanding cooperation with the countries across the global south. He pursued the North-South corridor, which involves India. He also pursued better relations with Central Asian countries and China, and became an active participant in the Belt and Road Initiative. He joined BRICS as well as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and he expanded Iran's ties with countries across Africa and Latin America. He therefore was able to decrease Iran's dependency on the West, but also simultaneously he pursued negotiations with Western countries to revive the nuclear deal, but in a more acceptable form, a better protected deal so that the Americans can't cheat Iran again. President Pezeshkian so far is pursuing the same sort of policy because he has not critiqued Iran's policy of expanding ties with the global south, which would include India. And he also says we should see if we can cut a deal with the West. But he too, in his last debate, said that if the West doesn't make the right decisions, then we will pursue other options. So in a sense, although in the West they say that President Pezeshkian is different from President Raisi, I would say that from what we've seen and based upon his official statements, he's actually closer to President Raisi than his rival in the second round of the election, because Dr. Jalili, who lost in the second round, was opposed to the nuclear negotiations that Dr. Raisi was carrying out in Vienna a couple of years ago. So in a sense, as I said earlier, Dr. Pezeshkian is a centrist in Iranian politics. Dr. Raisi was also a centrist in Iranian politics. So we do see strong similarities, even though everyone has their own unique background. Whereas Dr. Jalili, who many in the West seem to think that it was an extension of Dr. Raisi, he was actually quite different.
Mm-hmm. So where does the nuclear deal stand right now? How does Iran see it? What is it doing internally?
The nuclear deal was, of course, a deal that had many flaws. It was signed in 2015. I was with the delegation in Vienna when it was negotiated, and the flaws came out almost immediately as Obama violated it from day one, and then Trump ultimately tore up the deal with zero consequences. 2 years ago, after lengthy negotiations during the Raisi presidency, the deal was revived, was nearly revived, but a deal with much better protection, so that the Americans and the Europeans couldn't violate it without paying a cost. But sadly, after all the delegations basically agreed upon a text, the Americans balked, they backed away, and they never signed up to the deal. So the United States missed an opportunity 2 years ago. They were betting on the riots in in Iran a couple of
Mhm.
years back.
Yeah.
They miscalculated. They did not listen to sane people who are saying that public opinion is very much behind the Islamic Republic of Iran, and their attempts or their moves to destabilize the country or to support rioters are not going to get them anywhere. But they failed to listen and they lost that opportunity. Dr. Pezeshkian is basically saying we can strike a deal, but again, not like in 2015, a deal where the Americans will have to abide by their commitments.
So, is there a way forward? I mean, or everything depends on the complexion of the new administration in Washington?
Everything will depend, I think, on Washington, whether it's the current regime or it's the next regime. They're the ones who have to make the decision because, as I said, 2 years ago, we came to an agreement. Joseph Borrell, actually, it was almost 2 years ago,
Yeah.
almost exactly 2 years ago, 2 years and a couple of weeks ago, Joseph Borrell did an interview where he said that the Iranian demands are reasonable and that he hopes the Americans will accept the deal so we can move on.
Yes.
And the Americans never did that. So he, in that interview, which people can find online, uh, we in Iran assumed that an agreement was imminent, and I personally was planning to go back to Vienna within a couple of days for the signing ceremony, which never happened.
Mhm. So, presently, what is the status of Iran's nuclear program? Are you going forward with enrichment? What are you doing exactly?
Yes, the Iranian nuclear program is active like all countries across the world. Iran abides by its international commitments within the framework of the NPT and the International Atomic Energy Agency. But Iran will not give any extra access or accept any limitations um, because we have no agreement with Western regimes to do so. The nuclear deal what brought about circumstances, or the nuclear deal within the framework of the nuclear deal, Iran would limit certain activities in order to create trust
Yeah.
and give greater access in order to show that it is completely transparent. Iran did that for years. Iran was the only side that was committed to its obligations within the framework of the deal, whereas the Americans and the Europeans violated their side of the bargain from day
Yeah.
one. And the
Yeah.
Iranians showed the world that the Iranian nuclear program was and is, and has always been a peaceful nuclear program. And during the uh, time when Iran was abiding by its commitments, the International Atomic Energy Agency issued 15 statements saying that Iran was completely and fully committed to its requirements and that there was no evidence that Iran's nuclear program was anything but peaceful.
Mhm. Is the IAEA presently not allowed to monitor Iran's nuclear facilities, or what's the situation?
Iran allows the International Atomic Energy Agency to monitor Iran's nuclear facilities, but it gives them the same sort of access that South Korea gives, or Japan gives, or Brazil gives, no less and no more.
Mhm. Let's look at Pezeshkian. He has promised a kinder approach towards women, and where does he actually stand on the issue of women's rights, on the kind of riots that we saw in Iran some years ago over hijab and all that? Is there a chance that milder policies are being framed under him?
I think that is these are Western narratives basically. Everyone in all countries in the West, they speak about women's rights. It's not that the government or the state in Iran is not kind to women. We have large numbers of women scientists, we have women pilots, we have women taxi drivers. My boss at the University of Tehran, the dean of my
Hmm.
faculty, is a woman. And women over the last 21 years, where I've been an academic at the University of Tehran, 18 of those years for 18 of those years, women have been the dean of my faculty. So these narratives are by the West are basically to serve their own purposes. Their allies in the region, remember the West helped create the Taliban and other groups before the Taliban, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The West created ISIS. The West supported Wahhabi groups.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are supporting groups that have been opposed, who have been against providing women with rights. Whereas in Iran, after the revolution, women, most women before the revolution did not go to school. Now we have universal education. For decades now after the revolution, most university students are women. But of course, President Pezeshkian spoke about enhancing the rights of women, just like the other candidates. And that's what people do in politics. The issue of the hijab is not as nearly as controversial as you think. Most people not that you think, but as many people from the outside may think, most people in Iran are religious. Some people who do not wear the hijab, many of them believe in the hijab, but they choose not to do so. They're not practicing, just like in your country, some people who are Hindu or Christian or Muslim may believe in their faith, but they may not practice their faith. So it's not a big issue, but just like everything else when it comes to Iran, the West creates a very negative image. In Iran, on the one hand, we have elections. In the West, they say they often say it's a farce.
Yeah.
And then when someone is elected, they say, oh, this is not good for the so-called regime because he says something different. Well, if it's a farce and the president has no authority, then how can it be bad for the so-called regime, as they say? Or sometimes they say the president has no authority. And then other times, if you recall, during President Ahmadinejad's term, they were saying he was a threat to the world.
Yeah.
If he has no authority, then how can he be a threat to the world? So all these Western narratives are inconsistent with one another, but they're all negative, and that's the point.
What about the economy? Does the new president have some ideas about ending isolation, ending sanctions? Any ideas he's talked about?
I think he's going to continue pursuing the Shanghai Cooperation or the strengthening of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is increasingly moving towards rethinking economic models. He will, of course, continue to push for the strengthening of BRICS, which is also a means to decrease the importance of the US dollar and Western-dominated financial institutions in global trade. He will be pursuing bilateral and multilateral relations. For example, the North-South corridor is an opportunity for India and Iran to work together more closely with regards to trade with Russia and Central Asia and the Caucasus and Afghanistan. So these policies that have been pursued by President Raisi will be further exploited by President Pezeshkian to decrease the impact of Western sanctions. But at the same time, he will be checking to see if the Americans and the Europeans are willing to be reasonable, if they're willing to behave more reasonably towards Iran. We can have an agreement. I think it depends very much on whether Western politicians are going to behave rationally. They have more than enough problems on their hand. They have Ukraine, they have China, and they have the outrageous genocide in Gaza to deal with, and they have destroyed their image and they're losing their power and they're declining. So they need Iran today more than ever before. And President Pezeshkian is giving them an opportunity to shift their policy. So we'll have to wait and see.
What's your sense of which way the war in Gaza is going? There are some reports that Israel could expand the war to take on Hezbollah.
Israel has lost in Gaza. Israel has lost in the eyes of the world. It has shown itself to be an illegitimate, brutal, and barbaric regime. It is genocidal, it has been exposed to the world. It has been unsuccessful in capturing a dot on the map called the Gaza Strip. After 9 months, it shows that it's a weak and vulnerable regime. It shows that its it has shown that its military intelligence is deeply flawed, and its ability to fight is not nearly as good as what it always claimed to be. And if it expands the war against Lebanon, the defeat will only become more visible for the world to see. The Israeli regime will lose against Lebanon. Hezbollah is much stronger than the resistance in Gaza. But Netanyahu is destroying the Israeli regime because he is desperate to cling on to power, because he knows quite well that if the war ends, then he will lose power and probably go to jail.
Last word on India. Where do you see ties with India going under the new president?
I think that ties with India will continue to expand. The Chabahar agreement between the two countries, Iran and India, was a symbolic and important move. India's support for Iran's joining of BRICS is something that has not gone unnoticed in Iran. So the opportunities for the two countries are very big. And as I said, the North-South corridor, whether it's to the east of the Caspian, to the west of the Caspian, or through the Caspian, provides enormous opportunities for the two countries. And I think that the president-elect and the Indian Prime Minister will do their best to exploit these opportunities.
And you would like India to step up its involvement in Chabahar?
Well, India is actually doing that, as you know, but I think that India should push hard, especially at the beginning of the new presidency, to expand these achievements and to push them forward more swiftly. I think the Iranian side should also do the same.
Professor Marandi, thank you very much. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's all we have for you on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our social media. Do follow us on YouTube. And thank you very much.